This is Robert Merlacci, the Mindshare Learning Report. Happy Friday, here from the Mindshare workspace at Erin Mills Town Center. And welcome to This Week in Canadian EdTech with a very special guest, fellow alumni from Pepperdine University's Learning Technology Program, Masters in EdTech, Julia Fallon, who is the Executive Director of SETDA, State Education Technology Directors Association, celebrating its 20th year this past 21.
We're illegally
delayed because of COVID, but it recently at the forum in DC, some of the highlights around cybersecurity, digital equity, and ICT skills we'll be talking about. Thank you for joining me, Julia.
Thanks for having me, Robert.
Well, I'm going to say a little bit more about you because your resume is extensive. And so Julia Fallon is a technology and learning alchemist. She explores and probes big ideas in K-12 education with tech integration, how to make sure all kids acquire the skills to participate in digital society, and what is the collective and creative impact of thriving online communities involved with learning technology since 1989. She is an avid proponent of dynamic learning experiences where highly effective instructional strategies integrate a wide range of digital technologies. One of the things I was going to mention is that the World Wide Web coordinator that you were back at the University of Michigan
a long time ago
in 1995, and I want you to touch on that. But most recently, she is the executive director of, as I mentioned, the State Educational Technology Directors Association, where she works with U.S. state and territorial digital learning leaders to empower the education community to leverage technology for learning, teaching, and school operations. Her professional interest lies in making the case for public school systems wherein educators are able to optimize technology-rich learning environments to equitably engage the learners who fulfill the classroom. And Julia was previously at the State Department Office's Superintendent of Public Instruction for many years in Olympia, Washington. So Julia, always great to connect with you, my fellow Pepperdine alumni. Great memories there. And thank you for joining us at our summit in Montreal. Sadly, I missed your summit. Hence, I wanted to have a reflection of both, perhaps, because of my kitchen rental being so delayed. My apologies again.
It happens. Things happen and everything
Wow.
else.
So, it's incredible post-COVID, how fascinating a time it's been. We saw the best of times and the worst of times. And Gardner, that was presenting at the WASBO conference today, which is a similar, more provincial association of IT folks, they talked about the mass infusion of spending in IT because of the mission critical requirements that it has. And cyber security was very high on the list, no doubt. But let's perhaps, reflect a little bit about the time it's been and how long now? Is it 2 years?
It's almost 2 years in this position. Yeah. Yes. I've been actually with the organization for 18 years. I just celebrated 18 years.
In a volunteer capacity.
I was the state member from the Washington representing the state.
And then you crossed to the dark side.
And I crossed over, to the staff side. And it's been helpful, obviously, being a state member, knowing the history of the organization. I wasn't one of the originals, so I often refer to them as the OGs. I'm not one of the OGs, but I am the next generation in some ways, and have been around long enough to see the evolution. And then obviously I'm trying to help with the board of directors set the course of our organization, hopefully for the next 20 years, and everything else. We've been around a long time.
Well, you bring an immense amount of expertise. And what was it like when you were leading the World Wide Web at the University of Michigan?
So it's interesting because I actually, I think about my career, even just in high school, right? We talk about career exploration. So I went to a high school where I took 4 years of math and science, and no one talked to me about engineering. I don't know if it was because I was a girl or was just not the thing. But I was really into sports. I was a student athlete. I loved baseball. So I thought, okay, health careers. I can do a health career. That's where we kind of landed. And then I ended up in a course. I ended up sort of in a physical therapy like major at New York University is where I went for my undergrad.
Right.
And realized that soon after taking these kind of those classes where you have 400 kids, it's all biochemistry, whatever. I was like, this is not what I saw for myself.
Right.
And then trying to figure out on your own in some ways, like where can you go? What can you do? And I kind of locked in on system analyst. So for those of you that are old enough, in the 90s, that was like the hot term, like being a system analyst. And instead of transferring to the business school, I decided to stay in the School of Ed, and I would just do the business education program. It mirrored in essence the same classes, and you kind of come out in the same space. But during that experience, I had to take some computer classes. It was part of business education. It was back in the day when it's like WordPerfect 5.1 and Lotus 1, 2,
remember
3,
that well.
4. And I remember taking these 1-week courses during the summer, and I was so mad at myself in some ways because I picked up really quickly, and I was like, geez, I could have been at the beach for 5 days for the semester before after I typed on a word processor at 20. And then I realized how technology would actually help me like complete some of those like user tasks very easily.
Right.
The professor in that class actually caught on that. He was like, God, you're a quick study. You should come work for me in the computer lab. I'm like, no, like, you don't understand. Like, this is my first time. Like, this is not, besides playing computer games. So like we did have, my cousins had a Commodore 64. So it's not like I was like totally not in front of a computer, but it wasn't just something I used. We weren't using it. It wasn't in our households. He brought me over. I trusted him, and I ended up working in a computer lab. And then that's how my kind of career in academic computing, which is EdTech at the post-secondary level, happened. But 95, so that was 89 during my undergrad years. In 95 is really when the World Wide Web started, and the internet really became to the United States in terms of it was everywhere. You started seeing the www.
You were a pioneer. You and one of your former vice presidents, you were pioneers.
I don't know if we were pioneers. We had a lot of experience with the internet before the public got to it, if that makes any sense. So
I was at York University at the time, and I was sport information director. We were just getting on the internet.
Yep.
Right?
But there was an internet that was there beforehand for research. Yeah, for research purposes. And we were connecting with other students that happened to find themselves in computer labs.
Right.
And then messing around. And when the World Wide Web came out, if you looked at HTML code and you were familiar with WordPerfect 5.1, it really looked like Reveal Codes. It was the same sort of programming language, if you want to use it, like, very loosely. But then you could create stuff, and then you have these skills, and then schools are trying to get on board, and how do you do it? And it was very rudimentary HTML. It wasn't like this craziness that you get into now when you look at code, but it was just a skill set that I had. And I've always been in that role of user services. So understanding what's happening technically and then explaining it by metaphors or however. So there's always that teaching. So I was in the right school, I feel like, as an undergrad. Like I was in the School of Ed was like the right place for me. And then the technology lets me learn something new every day. So that's what I love about it, is I literally learn something new every day. And that's what keeps me hooked.
So that growth mindset. We talked about the growth mindset in Montreal as a skill.
Yep. And being curious. And I think I go back to when I was younger too. While we lived in New York City, I spent my summers in Washington State, which is where my family is from. Right. And I always went to the Science Center, and no one picked up on, why is Julia spending so much time I love the Science Center. I still love the Science Center because you could go in there and manipulate things and play around. And so that curiosity has always been there. It's just trying to identify how you could actually turn that into a career.
And segue very nicely into your future roles, and most recently at SETDA as the executive director. And problem solving is a big part of what we do today, and instilling that mindset in kids besides the growth mindset is so that you have those skills that make you agile and adaptable for what's coming in resiliency post-COVID.
And recognizing patterns. I feel like some of the stuff is recognizing patterns.
Yes.
So, hey, that looks like this. Oh, that looks like this. And then you can actually also see when you're kind of going off course too, when something's not following a pattern. So a lot of the things we've done, we're just cyclical. We're doing it again, and just maybe a different way. So
How
it's
was SETDA, the first SETDA face to face post COVID? What was that experience like?
so we intentionally designed it to make space for people to reconnect. I knew
Oh,
how important it was. So I've always been part of online communities my entire life, like since I got on the internet, right? So back in person, we're like, okay, people are going to want to talk to each other. They haven't, even though you've been on Zoom and there's time to connect, you're not physically in the same space. How do you make the breaks a little bit longer so that you can still take care of what you need to take care of, but you may continue a conversation that just happened in the hallway? We were intentional about not having people speak during meals so that you could actually enjoy your meal and have a conversation. And then we did some our keynote. Oh, I know you have a picture of Patty DeBrose.
Yeah, I have the sketch note we're featuring behind me.
Talking about where we want to go. I mean, now that
Can
the
you talk us through this? It's like
sure. So
pretty complex.
Well, no,
The Coles notes.
She was capturing notes for us,
right.
In essence. But what I wanted to do is have time initially when we started off, when we were all together in the same room. What's happened and what do you have on your plate and what things, because we're still kind of working through the pandemic and the impact of the pandemic, right? In our jobs, in our lives. And then how do you then start to look at the future? So what are we leaving behind? What can we picture it? And in some ways, if you think about it, you need to be able to see it. Visual, it's almost like personal vision, but also what we want for ourselves as an organization. We're going through the exercise of strategic planning. So that we can figure out where we want to focus. You know what I mean? You can't have 50 things that you're working on. You have to have a key few things. And Patty really just helped us connect with all of our senses, right? And drawing and, like just visualizing it. And it was a great tone setter for a little self-discovery too for folks. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter if you were a state leader or you were one of our partners, our corporate partners, or you were one of, our invited guest. It wasn't so pigeonholed in a topic that you could use this skill, and you could actually use this skill when you go back to your organizations in some ways.
Brilliant. How important you mentioned reference corporate partners coming out of the pandemic, sustaining learning in a crisis? Some of those partners were mission critical. How important have partnerships become as they've had a light shone upon them going forward?
Partnerships are important because one is industry is not the industry in terms of technology. We're now out front and center, right? I know this probably breaks a lot of people's hearts. We are not the hotbed of innovation. We are not. Like, this is not the industry sector that is the hotbed of industry at all. Like, we're towards the back when it comes to that. However, by working with partners, right, and knowing what else is going on in other industry sectors and how things are being adopted and what we know about teaching and learning, what can we take and put into our classrooms, right? I know, and this is part of my work that I did when I was with OSPI in Washington State, which is the Department of Ed. Career paths, right? Everybody uses skills. We all use them. Regardless of your career path, you're probably using 11 applications that we all use. You use GIS, you use word processing, you use presentation. You need that regardless. You could be agriculture. You could still be using all of those things. When you become a producer, an IT producer, a computer scientist, the database administrator, that's a whole other function and skill set. And then you need to know what industry you're working in. So I could be a database person in healthcare. I could be a computer scientist, writing code for the defense, department, things like that. So for us, it's really understanding those partnerships. We can borrow, but also helping them understand the ecosystem that is ed, you know what I mean? And how we are resourced and what's important. I mean, during the pandemic, no one was missing the Bell schedule or science lab. We were really missing community ritual,
right?
Like that. That's what we were craving. And a school is good at doing that types of things, and even more so than other industries. I think that's why we did so well. We were
brilliant. And illuminating the realities of education, because it isn't, corporate, and there are nuances.
And they're kids. I mean, ultimately, they're not adults. We're not working with adults like we do in other spaces. We are working with kids that are still developing, and from when they're very young until they're teenagers, and then they're still developing when they leave our system. So,
and on that note, so the digital divide was illuminated. There was a quote out of the Office of EdTech that we shared that was quite poignant. Talk to me about the digital divide and the notion of digital equity and how that resonated, and what's the future look like?
So when the pandemic was hitting, a bunch of us were like, we told you there was access issue. We told you the teachers didn't have skills. And it wasn't a surprise. You know what I mean? And I often use Utah as an example. Like Utah, so there was federal funding there for a while, right? To make sure that all students were digitally literate by the 8th grade, getting devices. We've always been working on the access issue, because it's not just specific to schools, right? It's also specific just to communities, rural communities, urban communities.
Absolutely.
We're moving more online. To apply for a job, you have to have online access. We've always been working on those types of things. When when the pandemic hit, Utah, in essence, when federal funding went away in 2011, and in some states still had state funding, but then it fell off. But Utah continued. They saw it as it benefits their students if we continue to do this, right? And they have a mix of both rural and urban, depending. But we're going to continue to invest. We're going to continue to invest in the things that you need in order to have this in the ecosystem. Well, they literally went on spring break in March of 2020, and 2 weeks later they came back. They said, we're ready. Like they've been working on the device thing. And it literally, a lot of us were like, whoa, what just, it's because they invested, they continued to invest. Whereas other states, depending on where they invested, experienced probably the counter part of the wheel that they needed to do. So the core things about every student, the pandemic for us in terms of educational technology was an accelerant. Talks about like lighting a fire and letting it burn. It burned. And the good news is we went from, I don't remember what the stat is, maybe I think it was 40%. Don't quote me on that, but we went to like 95% of kids now have devices. Amazing. And they have connectivity, right? It's huge. We still have to work on that bit that don't, and how we serve communities that either geographically don't have access or legislatively because regulations don't have access, but we can figure that out. I think we're going to solve that problem. And I have to say, and I was saying this in basically the end of 2020, I can see us now connecting every single household. There was a time before the pandemic where I wasn't sure we were going to get there because Congress didn't have the will, and now they have the will, and they can see the benefits. Right. What we're going to do though going forward is we're really trying. And if you notice, when you're stressed out, you kind of revert to what you know. So there wasn't a lot of adoption of new things. If you were already using an LMS, you weren't going out and adopting a new LMS.
Right.
So I think teachers were really trying to figure out how to use the tools that were there. And now I think districts and states are trying to figure out what kind of applications, and I'm going to use applications, need to be in the system. Like, does an LMS need to be there? It doesn't matter which one, but you need to have an LMS, right? Or how does it all work together? Interoperability. How do we protect student data? They're now, I think there's a report from Learn Platform, 140 something EdTech tools. That's a lot. Mm-hmm. And are they replicating themselves? Is it duplicate? Do they work together? These are things that we could use our partners help with, but also encouraging more research and evidence in terms of
as was the theme of our summit in Montreal, mm-hmm. evidence-based research, and we're creating a EdTech preparedness, crisis preparedness playbook out of that. So stay tuned. We want to gather the research and help districts prepare for the next crisis.
Well, we want districts to also, like, this is Ed, to be part of the research, right? Like, how do you, when you implement a tool, give back so that everybody can learn what type of environment does this work best in, efficacy of your products. We need to be smarter about how we spend the money. We're not going to see this influx of money again. Can we show the impact it can have? Can we help teachers design better? learning experiences
Yeah.
for students using
It
the
has,
technology.
I mean, I could see that being a project of the EdTech office. Are they
Yep.
pursuing this?
We are.
And we have a fellow alumni place there.
Yes, they do. We are looking at. I mean, I've had some conversations with them around research and evidence and what that looks like, and of course, we have ideas. I'm hoping. One of the things that I do with our membership is to help them understand what the issue is and how they can connect dots. So one of the things I would hope that we can start to tackle next year is, can we look at what are the systems that need to be in place in order for research to happen? And how do we help partners, those that have applications and everything else, actually know where they are in the research tiers, right? So in the federal program space, you have to have evidence-based solutions. Does everybody know what those 4 things are? You know what I mean? Does everybody, how do they show it? How can you call a provider and say, show me the evidence, and you read it and you understand it? It's not just saying, well, we think it's going to work. Like, you are actually participating. And I would like to get to a place where it is so part of our DNA that if you're not doing it, then you're seen as suspect. Does it make sense? Like, why aren't you doing that? You should be doing it. So because of where we are, right? And we want, if everybody's contributing a little bit, then you can have better efficacy of tools, right? And not just buying it because you went to a conference and someone gave you a really good sales pitch.
Thank you for that. Speaking of tools and hybrid learning, remote learning, online learning, cybersecurity emerged as one of the top challenges. We heard of LA Unified being, breached, and how did that resonate at the summit and at your forum? And you released a report.
We did the State Tech Trends report, which is our first report. We'll be doing it again next year.
Congratulations!
Thank you. Cybersecurity is right on there because it's the hot topic, and you're seeing incidences like LA Unified and other districts. The question is, how many districts aren't being public with it either? So we don't really know the true. We're trying to figure out, how do you create safe spaces for people to actually say, I had a breach, I need help, and that sort of thing. Believe it or not, the insurance industry is was driving some of this push for people to really look at cybersecurity, because it's a business risk. And I have talked about, if you take a school down, you impact a community. It's not just the school. You impact an entire community because kids have, like parents have their kids in there, and they may have to take off if the school is closed. I mean, it starts to replicate everything else. But it's a hot topic. How do you fund it? Is there ways for economies of scale? And like, for example, and one we use is, Connecticut as a state purchased DDoS mitigation software for the entire state for all schools and libraries. And that helps lower the cost at the district level, but also it gives it a kind of a blanket around the state, right? They're running it on the state network. Are there other ways that we can do economies of scale and have districts opt into those services, right? I mean, we want to respect local control and everything else, but then they have the opportunity to actually maybe purchase services through a cooperative or a collaborative or a statewide contract or that sort of thing. Because we're all kind of in it together. It really is one of those hot topics about, we've been advocates with COSIN, the Consortium of School Networking, which represents our local district IT staff, to see if E-Rate, which is a federal program that covers telecommunication and connectivity needs for schools and libraries, to modernize the definition of what a firewall is. I mean, that's really like getting into the IT side, but can we modernize that so they can actually, when they buy a firewall, they can pay for more of the services with those dollars. It's, believe it or not, E-Rate is the largest technology funder of schools. It's not appropriated by Congress. That's the interesting thing. We don't have to rely on Congress's whims and whatever. It comes to them through the Treasury Department and the FCC. So
fascinating. Yeah. Talk to me about the retention of staffing around supporting IT. I know in Canada, some of the districts lost 30% of their staffing, and competing with the private sector is not an easy thing to do. How do you sustain your learning environments in back end when you've got challenges with staffing?
The staffing thing is a hard one because I think it depends on your philosophy about it as well. We do have a lot of districts that are small, like they're not an LA Unified, right, where they can hire a team. Like I'm pretty sure
Right.
that the team is larger than my entire staff. You know what I mean? And you know, they're probably larger than lots of city staffs as well. The thing is, like, we commissioned as part of our cybersecurity, we have a cybersecurity collaborative to help our members understand what cybersecurity is, what's facing, and how do we all come together and learn from each other. And we worked with COSIN to actually talk about what does it cost, because a lot of people we would often at the state level get a call saying, I need to hire somebody. What does that look like? And I'm like, well, what do you need them to do? And they weren't sure. And how do you, you may not need to hire just a cybersecurity guy. You may need to have an IT guy that has a cert, or you may be able to hire your IT guy and then contract for services, right, through your local education service district or your state, or there's a combination of ways to make sure that you can staff those critical positions. I think we're going to be moving away in some ways of the math teacher doing this part-time, you know what I mean? In the closet. Like I always see these server closets in a closet. Really, like it's an old broom closet in school, but it's an essential function of what we do. So how do you allocate that, and helping also politicians understand what the true cost of that is helpful.
The notion of work integrated learning and having an IT desk at a high school with involving students and nurturing talent from within is something that we've seen a trend toward as well. Is that?
Well, also those students can handle a lot of the lower level inquiries that just people have problems with. My printer's not working, the software is not loading. It frees your IT staff up to do the, you know, we talk about tiers, like you get level 1 support, level 2. Then by the time it really gets to your IT staff, it might be a level 2 or level 3 thing. Like there's really a problem. Your level 1s can do that, but utilizing students is a great way. One is they get experience, and you may actually even find 1 or 2 of them that actually want to go into the field and become an IT person. And maybe they want to stick around and work in an ed environment.
Absolutely. What was the state of well-being like amongst the crew? I mean, that, you know, there's so much pressure put on states and districts and to sustain learning. How's everyone coming out of this?
I think that we are experiencing at the state level, we were experiencing the same thing that you were seeing in districts. There's a little bit of burnout. There's a little bit of just fatigue and everything else. When we met, we do our Emerging Trends Forum now virtually online. That's our June event. It's designed to help our leaders forecast and predict trends, because in policy, it takes a long time. And I'm trying to shorten the time frame a little bit. So they can start to be thinking about, oh, this is coming down the pike. How do I prepare for it? But during that event, I actually brought in a educational psychologist to talk to people about how they can take care of their own well-being, right? Because we often we're talking about how we do that for teachers, for students, but how do I do that for ourselves? And I remember saying to the membership and our partner saying, I'm taking a little bit of risk because this isn't our normal kind of offering. But I feel like it's important, just given in some ways it was a traumatic experience, and that we need to acknowledge that and take care of ourselves.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. And I think we're going to build in more of those things even during the leadership summit in person. Again, giving people time. Like I purposely made a 2-hour break. If you need to go take care of yourself, then you can go take care of yourself. It's not like you have to choose between, well, I want to listen and be involved and having, it's being more mindful about the self-care that has to happen and however that looks for folks. Yeah. It's just
absolutely. Thank you for that. And kudos to you for, you know, maintaining that balance. I know as folks in education, we tend to be selfless and forget about your own personal well-being. And I'm glad to be back at hockey 3 times a week, which is a great outlet for me. But what's next for for SETDA to look forward to?
What's next? I mentioned our strategic planning. I'm hoping that we'll wrap that up so we have some goals to work towards. Our state trends report will come out again, most likely in the spring.
What's an emerging trend that we should watch for?
So it's interesting. So cybersecurity is still going to be top of mind. What we found in our state trends survey that we just released in September was they say it's a top thing, but then there's no funding. So for me, I always talk about your budget often reflects your priorities. Even though you say this, you might not put your resources towards those types of priorities. We are trying to figure out, we don't have 50% of the states have an office of EdTech that's sort of coordinating. And we are not sure, given what happened in the pandemic, like what that looks like, and can we advocate for a little bit more of a formal, or at least helping states understand who needs to be on that team to really understand both the business side of education, but also the teaching and learning side, and making dots and those connections. So offices of EdTech. I'm trying to think what else is coming down the pike. Just the National EdTech Plan, SETDA was awarded the contract with the Department of Ed.
Congratulations.
Yeah, that was a big win.
That's huge.
September. So, well, in essence, we had written the proposal about, it's a policy document for those of you who are not familiar with the National EdTech Plan. It's the national policy document. It's the top tier one. And we are often at the state level the ones that have to take that policy document and then implement it and make it so, and through our own state plans or helping local districts make their own plans there, like it trickles down. And the proposal really was, we're often the ones that use that document the most. Could we have something that's more actionable? How do we close the digital divide? How do we help teachers understand the design divide that happens out there? Do you really understand how to design both your in-person experiences, or if you're doing blended learning, or if you're doing completely online, how do you design experiences? And you know this from our experiences at Pepperdine.
Yes.
How you have those skills to understand the different modalities to get a kid to the same place, right? They all don't have to be doing the same exact thing, the same exact way. How do you design things so that kids can show up and use technology to show and demonstrate their learning? And then the other one is, of course, accessibility. How do we make sure that we are meeting the needs of all students, regardless of any maybe learning disabilities that they may have, or how they learn, or what is there. We have a way to make sure we accommodate everybody. So it's just those are the National EdTech Plan goals. That work has just finally gotten up and underway. Next year be written. Next year be written, and then we hope that we're going to have it in about a year from now, maybe a little bit longer. We'll have that plan that's out, and that'll be a really great thing to have done as well. So it's a big project.
Amazing. It sounds like your roof reno is back underway as well.
Oh no, you hear it? Yeah, you hear that.
So you've been very generous of your time today, Julia Fallon, and really value your insight and passion and vision for the future of learning. So kudos to you for your leadership. Thank you. Grateful to have you on our show today.
Thank you, Robert, so much. I appreciate it.
That was Julia Fallon, the Executive Director of SETDA. My name is Robert Murdelacci of the MindShare Learning Report. Be sure to check out www.MindShareLearning to get your latest issue. And until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and keep the learning curve steep.